Okay, now I think we're working here. So, again, if you have questions or however, while we're going, maybe email me because I'm not really gonna be looking at the chat at least this go around. So if you have questions, send me an email. They'll get sent off to my phone and then we can talk about it. But again, yesterday what we got into is we started talking about the rise of what you guys read about was the rise of nationalism and the rise of sectionalism. So this first guided reading that you worked on, right? We had two of them that were kind of combined just into one. So the first guided reading that we were working on here is starting to talk about a little bit more about the economies in the North and the South. So this is something really that goes back even to colonial days when we start talking about the differences in the economy between the North and the South. So again, the South was more so primarily an agricultural economy, whereas in the North they were more dependent on trade, eventually banking and manufacturing, less agriculture. Okay, so when you think economies, you're thinking about how a region, how a place, how they make their monies, I guess you would say. So in the case of the southern United States, their money, their economy was very reliant on agriculture, whereas in the North they were very reliant more so on business, commerce, manufacturing, and those types of things. So what we start to see happening here in the early 1800s is we're going to have an industrial revolution. Okay, and if you're one of those that likes to highlight things here as you go, I would do that. And that is because our manufacturing technology is going to improve. We're going to start seeing things like interchangeable parts where we can make parts in a uniform manner, and then those parts can be distributed. So even like with automobiles, when the automobile industry becomes a huge thing, you're going to see us start seeing a lot more of the interchangeable parts where manufacturers will make replacement parts essentially for vehicles and such. So this industrial revolution, which was characterized by mass production, was kind of a big thing in the United States, and it's going to affect both the North and the South a little differently. So again, as we're going here, if you want to highlight things, we're going to treat these guided readings just as we would a section of notes. So if you have things highlighted or if you want to make, annotations, please feel free to do that. All right. So again, we're going to see this happen both the North and the South, but it's going to affect, both regions a little differently. Okay. So like we said here, like what the guided reading is saying, New England, the Northeast, excuse me. Let me fix that. The Northeast is going to be more so, they're going to feel the more direct effects of this industrial revolution. And again, that is because, there's Morgan. That is because, too, again, the way the economies were set up. Also, New England, you had more of the access to rivers and things like that. So you're going to start seeing more of the, water power and different things like that. But in New England, the far Northeast, that's where you're going to see most of our early industrialization take place. And because manufacturing became huge in the Northeast, those American manufacturers wanted people to buy American-made goods. Okay, so when we start talking about tariffs and things like that, understand that. Okay. Thanks, Jake. I got it. JC, I also got it. Thank you. Okay. But again, Northeast, think more so manufacturing. Then we start talking about things like tariffs and such and why tariffs became a thing. Understand the fact that tariffs exist so that people buy domestically made goods. Essentially what a tariff does is it makes a foreign good more expensive. So we start talking about tariffs and those types of things. Just understand the fact that those are put into place to encourage people to buy domestically made goods. Okay, that's the whole idea here. Again, Industrial Revolution, how does it change New England? It leads to a growth of industry in the United States or in the Northeast. It also is going to lead to an increase in population. Okay, getting into our main body here, and we're looking at how did agriculture differ in the South and the North. Again, I would understand that in the North, kind of these statements here, basically saying that people in the North, their main goal in farming was to provide for their family. Okay, that's kind of like the big takeaway here. They weren't trying to just farm solely to make money, and that's because manufacturing was huge. I would also understand this last phrase, and this is kind of a big one too, especially as we start talking about the rise of sectionalism in the United States, is that the northern United States was far less reliant on slave labor than the South. Again, in the South, The South's economy had always been based on agriculture, even before the United States was a thing and we were just still colonies. Agriculture had always been king in the South. That was how they were making their money, plantation farming and such. Manufacturing was not so much a thing in the southern United States. Okay, so those are some big takeaways here. Again, and because some of these farms grew so much and slave labor became more of a thing, I would just simply understand that because of that, the population of slaves also is going to grow exponentially in the United States during the early 1800s and going into the middle part of the century. Okay, so big reasons for, economic differences. And those are things that are going to become huge factors, especially as we work our way forwards and start talking about sectional differences as it pertains to sectionalism and the divide ultimately between the North and the South over slavery. One of the leading politicians here then, again, and because of some of these differences in manufacturing and agriculture and such, that's where you're going to start to see some of that sectional divide, okay? And the congressman here, and his name's going to come up from now all the way up until the Civil War. This guy here, Henry Clay, he's going to serve as a variety of positions, Speaker of the House, he'll be a Secretary of State, et cetera, et cetera. And Henry Clay is going to do a lot from early 1800s into the mid 1800s. And one of the things that he's going to be the guy that proposes the Missouri Compromise that we'll get to here later on. But one of the early things that he proposed, and again, this was to try to ease the sectional tension between the North and the South, is he proposes an economic plan known as the American System. Okay, and that American System called for a variety of things. It called for improving our transportation networks in the United States. So under the American System, the United States is going to build a national road from Maryland to Illinois. We are also going to see other states start to improve their transportation networks. So that's where you see like the construction of the Erie Canal in New York. Okay. It'll also be around this time too where you start to see locomotives and such. Another part of this plan as well was to encourage American manufacturing. And this is where you're going to start to see some of the tariffs. As manufacturing increased in the United States, you're going to see more of these tariffs. And the idea was that it would increase the number of American goods being sold. So this last statement here in the guided reading is kind of an important one because, again, what it's going to do is it's going to increase the cost of foreign goods, and hopefully more people would just buy goods that were made in America. Okay? So, again, these are all things that were a part of this American system that Henry Clay is going to propose to improve our economy. So, again, national road, improving transportation networks. You're also going to see some different tariffs and such. Okay? Understand that with the tariffs, people in the North, they liked them. Again, the North was more so industrial than the South. They produced a lot of their own things. People in the South were more reliant on imported goods. So when you start talking about tariffs during this time, from the early 1800s into the middle 1800s, what you have to understand is that the South hated tariffs because they were still getting most of their goods from Europe, because manufacturing was not as prevalent in the South. The southern United States still got a lot of their stuff, a lot of their manufactured goods, I should say, from Europe because it was cheaper for them. And they also did not really want to do business with the North. Okay? So when you start talking about the rise of, so those of you that might have been at National Honor Society this morning, I think they served breakfast, right? Mr. Rose is enjoying some of that leftover breakfast right now. I'm trying to talk and chew my fruit salad at the same time, and it's not really working so well for me. So I'm just going to swallow my bite of mandarin orange here and wash it down with some Coca-Cola. Okay, Diet Coke, right? Got to watch the figure. But when it comes to these tariffs, big thing to understand is one of the things that leads to more sectional divide was tariffs, okay? So this statement here is kind of important. This first statement in this paragraph is people in the North are always generally going to support tariffs at this time because it would improve their business. At least that was the idea. people in the southern United States and people in the western United States were not as thrilled about them, simply because it made goods for them more expensive. And they thought like it was a way of the North kind of, I don't know, giving them the short end of the stick. So after some talk and such, that tariff of 1816 is going to go away. Okay. We also see some talk here about the National Bank. That was also another part of that Henry Clay's American system. And I would understand that that was something that was just kind of supported because people viewed that as a good thing, as a safe place for the United States to store its currency. But big thing here to understand is that some of these tariffs are going to lead to that sectional divide between the North and the South early on, because of the fact that the South thought it was a way of the North trying to control them, essentially, or trying to ruin their business, because the South got most of their manufactured goods from Europe. Okay. So when we start looking at the table here a little bit, what were the two areas of the economy that the North was based on? Again, we're looking at manufacturing. Okay. We're looking at manufacturing, trade, those types of things. South's economy was based primarily on agriculture. So that's a big takeaway here. Main elements of the North's agricultural system. Again, it was mostly just like small scale farming, no slave labor, producing basically just enough to feed their families. Again, the South, that was huge scale plantation farming, mostly cotton with the invention of the cotton gin and such. Heavy reliance on slave labor. And then main elements of the manufacturing system is, again, I would understand the northern United States develops a pretty elaborate system of manufacturing. Lots of factories are going to pop up, especially along areas close to rivers and such, and they would rely on hydropower, like some of the early mills and that sort of thing. Okay. Also, I would understand that tariffs were implemented to try to build the manufacturing of the North so that more people would buy goods made in the United States. Okay, so again, change things as you need to, highlight, etc. I'm going to continue on here. All right, so getting into the rise of nationalism. So again, following the War of 1812, this is going to be when the United States starts to really view itself as its own country. So we start talking about nationalism. We're talking about this right here. Got the nice definition for you. So we're looking at the good of the whole, right? We're looking at the good of the common country. That's nationalism. Okay, it can also refer to pride in one's nation and that sort of thing. But looking at the rise of nationalism that's going to take place really from the end of James Madison's presidency through the presidency of James Monroe. Okay, so that's when you're thinking about time periods and that sort of thing, that is what we're on. Okay, so when we start talking about nationalism and strengthening our national government, strengthening our federal government, we have to talk about a very important Supreme Court case, and that is the McCulloch versus Maryland case. This is one of the Supreme Court cases that you have to know. And you don't need to know all of the details about it. You just need to know some big ideas. Okay? So going back to Articles of Confederation time, understanding that under the Articles of Confederation, the states were outrageously powerful. Okay, the national government did not really have any power whatsoever. So then when our Constitution is ratified, one of the big goals was to strengthen our national government. And so that is done. It is now 1819. Our Supreme Court is going to hear a very important case regarding the strength of the national government. So we had talked just briefly here about a Bank of the United States and how early on most people thought a Bank of the United States was a good idea. It would be a place where the United States could store its money, print money, that sort of thing. Not everybody was happy about it. So you have to understand that if we were to look at the Constitution, there is nothing in the Constitution that says anything about the United States government having the power to create a national bank. It says that Congress can print money and coin money and do all these different things, but it does not say anything about having a bank. So the state of Maryland is going to try to challenge that. So this second Bank of the United States was in Maryland. It was built there. And you have to understand that one of the way that states made money was through taxes. So the state of Maryland starts taxing this new Bank of the United States in an attempt to put it out of business. The Bank of the United States, the guy McCulloch was the president of, he is going to challenge that and say, I'm not going to pay your taxes because you're trying to put us out of business. Maryland eventually is going to sue the Bank of the United States or McCulloch in saying you have to pay us taxes. Maryland essentially was challenging the power of the national government to create the bank. Okay, so when the Supreme Court is done ruling on this, what they say is, hey, the states, you cannot overtake a federal entity. Like your state law, your state law in this case that's trying to close the Bank of the United States is not superior because this is a national law. So in this particular case, the Supreme Court's going to rule in favor of McCulloch or the United States, if you want to look at it that way, basically saying that the United States, you have the power to make these laws to strengthen the government, to strengthen the national government, in this case, creating a national bank. So that is the case to be aware of, If you just know that it strengthens the national government, you're going to be just fine. Another case was Gibbons and Ogden. That had to do with states and rivalries over trade and such. We had kind of talked about how that became a thing during that had become a thing during the Articles of Confederation days, where states were very competitive with one another over trade. So don't worry so much about Gibbons and Ogden right now. Getting into John Quincy Adams. So again, John Quincy Adams eventually is going to become a president. We'll talk more about him in class tomorrow or Friday, depending on when I will see you next. But again, understand that John Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams. He came from a political family. His dad looked like a penguin, and he just had very big, bushy sideburns. But again, his foreign policy when he serves as Secretary of State, and that's important you understand that he was Secretary of State. But when he served as Secretary of State, he's going to start, again, implementing this policy of nationalism, trying to strengthen the United States. Okay? So anyways, keep that in mind. A couple of the other things that he is going to do is he is going to work on treaties that establish boundaries between the United States and Canada that was owned by Great Britain. Okay? The other thing he is going to do as Secretary of State, and politically, this is probably his biggest accomplishment. Okay? Politically, this Adams-Onis Treaty is J.Q. Adams. It is his biggest political accomplishment. So essentially what's going to happen is the United States, some of the American citizens are going to start settling in parts of Florida. Okay, and again, Florida at this point in time was a Spanish colony. It was owned by Spain. And, Spain did not want American citizens living there. And John Quincy Adams was like, hey, I can't control these Americans in Florida. Okay, you guys got to either sell it to us or whatever. So eventually what happens is as more American settlers move into Florida, Spanish Florida, quote unquote, illegally, Spain is going to sell Florida to the United States. Okay. Spain is also going to give up some of its claims it had in the western part of what is now the United States and Oregon. So I would understand under the Adams-Onis Treaty, the United States acquires Florida from Spain. And it's probably John Quincy Adams. It's his biggest, quote-unquote, political accomplishment, okay? The other big thing that we have to talk about here, too, is James Monroe. So, again, James Monroe is president. He's going to serve 2 terms after James Madison. He had been a Secretary of State under James Madison. And the big thing to know about James Monroe is this Monroe Doctrine. This is huge. So James Monroe becomes president. He's going to serve his 2 terms. And right around this time, so again, so Monroe became president He would have won the election of 1816. And he's going to serve his 2 terms, so he's going to serve until 1824. Something that was going on in North America around this time is that countries like Russia, countries like Spain and Portugal, they wanted to get some of their old colonies back, especially like in present-day Latin America. Russia, little but known fact, so like Russia owned Alaska. We eventually buy Alaska from Russia. But Russia actually set up trade posts in what is now California. So kind of a lesser known thing. So when Monroe becomes president, like his big long lasting thing that he did, and we still see some of the effects of it today, is he's going to issue a statement that is known as the Monroe Doctrine. And basically what the Monroe Doctrine does, or what it did, is it drew a line in the sand, okay? And when I mean that, it drew a line in the earth, okay? And James Monroe basically tells Europe to stay out of the Western Hemisphere, okay? That this is essentially, quote unquote, the United States' side of the world, okay? And James Monroe says, if you as a European nation, whether you are Russia, whether you are Spain, Portugal, etc., if you try to regain any of your lost colonies in the Western Hemisphere, we as the United States are going to view that as an act of war, okay? Furthermore, the United States said that we recognize all of the countries that exist, and we're not going to do anything with them. But that's kind of interesting because what happens in the 1830s and 1840s is the United States starts taking abundances of land from Native Americans and other folks. We'll talk about that later. But Monroe Doctrine, big thing, like with foreign policy, is it told the European nations to stay out. Do not interfere in the Western Hemisphere. Do not do anything in South America, Central America, and do not come near the United States and try to tell us what land is ours versus what is yours. Okay, so that's another big thing here that's also going to strengthen, I guess, the United States and our sense of nationalism. Okay, last thing here today, just really quick, talking about the Missouri Compromise. And I know this is something that's come up here the past couple of weeks with presentations and such. But I would understand is that the United States, as we go deeper into the 1800s, okay, as we go deeper into the 1800s, the United States is going to start to acquire more territories, okay? We're going to start organizing, I guess what I should say is we're going to start organizing the Louisiana Purchase. We're going to start organizing some of that land into territories like Missouri, like Iowa, Minnesota, et cetera, eventually the Dakota Territory, okay? So the United States, we start organizing these territories that were a part of the Louisiana Purchase, okay? People start moving there, in other words. So one of the biggest things that comes up with this then is as we start adding territory, it becomes the sectional question of, is that land going to be free land or is it going to be slave land? Are we going to allow slavery there? Because again, the slave states wanted there to be more slave states. The free states wanted there to be more free states. And so as we start adding places like Missouri to the United States, as that starts to happen, the slave states and the free states, they're kind of battling it out over whether it's going to be free or slave. And Southern states especially saw any attempt to limit the spread of slavery as like the North kind of bullying them, okay? So understand that kind of that sectional question here is that when the North did anything, or if the Northern states support any law that limited slavery, it would greatly upset the South, okay? And so as we start adding more states like Missouri, like Alabama, etc., this is where that question is going to come up. So Henry Clay, again, know the name. Henry Clay is going to propose a series of a few different agreements that become known as the Missouri Compromise. And this Missouri Compromise is basically what is going to prevent any increase. Well, I should say this. It's going to ease the tensions between the northern states and the southern states for like 30 years, guys. Okay, and There's not a lot of laws that stick around for that long, but this Missouri Compromise is going to ease the tension between the North and the South for at least 30 years. Okay, it's leading right up into our Civil War. So what happens is under the Missouri Compromise is that Missouri is going to be admitted as a slave state. Maine's going to be admitted as a free state. And then what's going to happen is there's going to be a dividing line that's drawn. Okay, that line, the boundary, I guess, quote unquote, for the Missouri Compromise is going to be the southern border of Missouri. So if you're imagining like a map of the United States, imagine where the southern border of Missouri is. That's the 36th parallel, 36 degrees north latitude. That is going to be the boundary for slavery. So anything south of that line, quote unquote, could become slave territory. Anything north was supposed to be free. And both sides agreed to this. And this is ultimately what's going to kind of ease some of that tension between the North and the South for about the next 30, 35 years. Okay. So big things that we talked about here, just really quick. McCulloch in Maryland. Okay. McCulloch in Maryland, Supreme Court decision that is going to strengthen the superiority of national laws. Adams' Own East Treaty, the United States acquires Florida from Spain. Again, it increases the size of the United States. That sort of thing. Monroe Doctrine was a foreign policy that told the Europeans to stay out of our hemisphere. It promotes nationalism by the United States, kind of flexing its muscles and say, stay on your side of the earth. And then we have the Missouri Compromise having to do with the spread of slavery. How does it promote nationalism? Well, again, it's kind of like that sense of unity, okay? That sense that, all right, we have an agreement. Slavery can expand to the south of the line. Slavery will not expand to the north, and that should ease